When I asked about the date of my son's wedding, his bride looked me in the eye and laughed. Megan, that was her name. She tilted her head with that sharp little smile and said, "We got married last night, for special people only." I froze. My hands gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself. I thought I had misheard her. I thought maybe my hearing, these 72-year-old ears, was finally betraying me. But no, she repeated it, slower this time, like a knife sliding in, twisting, deliberate. For special people only. And in that instant, every detail I had been holding on to unraveled. The pale blue dress still hanging in my closet. The shoes I had never worn. The envelope with $1,000 in cash that I had set aside as a gift for their big day. Even the call I had made to my sister in Chicago, bragging that I was finally going to see my son David walk down the aisle. All of it collapsed into dust with 4 words. For special people only. I had raised David alone after my husband, Harold, died. 35 years of sacrifice, of working 2 jobs, of cutting coupons, of never once buying myself a new coat unless the old one was falling apart. 3 years of paying their monthly rent, $600 every month. Groceries, furniture, even the refrigerator that kept their milk cold and their champagne chilled. And still, I wasn't special. I looked at David, my only son, my baby boy, now 35, sitting beside his bride. He couldn't even meet my eyes. He rubbed his palms on his jeans, stared down at the floorboards I had refinished with my own hands. His silence was worse than her words. I said nothing. My throat was dry as paper. But inside, I could hear something cracking, the sound of an old, tired branch finally breaking under too much weight. You know, people often ask why stories like mine matter. Why listen to an old woman talk about family disappointments? But that's exactly why I tell it. Oh, because maybe you've been there too. Maybe you've been the one who gave everything, only to discover you were never invited to the moment that mattered most. Before I go on, let me ask you this. If you've ever been made to feel invisible by your own family, if you've ever been told you weren't special enough to belong, stay with me. This story is for you. And if you want to hear more stories like mine, click that little bell, subscribe, and join me here, because we need each other more than ever. Now, back to that moment. I remember blinking hard, trying to keep the room in focus. The sofa they were sitting on, that was mine. I had bought it for them last year. Megan's engagement ring, shining on her finger. I had helped pay for that too. I had thought I was sowing seeds for a future where my son would be happy, where I would still have a place. Instead, I had been financing my own erasure. My chest felt tight. I walked to the window, looked outside just to keep from crying. Across the yard, the country house glowed in the late afternoon light. The house where I had once dreamed we would gather as a family. Where I had imagined grandchildren running barefoot on the porch, the smell of pie drifting from the kitchen. And now I was told I was not welcome. I wanted to scream, but instead I whispered to myself, when did love start needing an invitation? When did motherhood expire like milk in the fridge? A few days later, my phone rang. Megan again. This time her tone was different. No mocking, no laughter. She sounded small, almost desperate. "Clara," she said. The country house taxes are due. We're already behind. Did you cover them? For a moment, I didn't answer. My mind spun back to that smirk. Those words. For special people only. I remembered how cold the room felt, how David had looked away. And I said, calmly, firmly, "Didn't I warn you? I only help special people." Silence. The kind of silence you can hear echoing in your own chest. And for the first time in years, it wasn't me who trembled. I cleared the dinner plates and set a yellow legal pad in the center of the table. The paper felt steady under my palm. Numbers tell the truth. They do not flatter. I wrote a simple title at the top. 3 years for David and Megan. First line, rent support. $1,500 each month. I marked 36 boxes for 36 months. The pen ticked like a clock. $54,000. I said it out loud so I could not pretend it was smaller. Second line, groceries and household supplies. I pictured carrying bags up their stairs in a snowstorm, steam from my breath meeting steam from a rotisserie chicken. $5,200. Third line, gifts and holidays. Birthdays, Christmas, a framed photo shoot, one restaurant dinner because Megan wanted pictures. $2,000. Fourth line, health and emergencies, urgent care copays, antibiotics, wrist brace, the minor surgery David put off until I covered the deductible. $1,200. Fifth line, car repairs. New battery, wiper motor. The night the alternator died in the pharmacy lot. $1,400. Sixth line, country house taxes. $2,300 each year for a home I'd hoped would host grandchildren, not ingratitude. $6,900 over 3 years. I drew a clean total and pressed the pen so hard the page dented. $70,500. Ledger of love. That was what it was. I had been buying family with money, believing David's freelance gigs would turn steady, but it never seemed to be enough. The table had a dark ring where my husband, Harold, once set a hot pot. I rubbed the circle and began a second column for costs that never show up on statements. Time, worry, pride swallowed until it tasted like metal. I wrote the mornings I woke at 5 to move funds so a transfer would clear by 9. The nights I waited for a message that said thank you and received one that said need. A memory returned. The first autumn after Megan moved in, their heater failed during a cold snap. David called from a checkout line, trying to sound calm. I could hear teeth clicking behind him. I bought 2 space heaters, paid the service fee, drove across town with soup. At home, I ate thin broth and called it dinner. The word temporary kept me company. Spring brought the pharmacy lot. The car would not start. I covered the tow and alternator. That same month, my church friends planned a bus trip to the coast. I said no because the dog needed shots and the deposit jumped. A neighbor invited me to share a cabin in the mountains. I passed because rent was due. I kept saying next time until there were no trips left. On the pad, I drew small hash marks for each quiet no. No to new shoes because David's hours were cut. No to strawberries in June because protein mattered more. No to the dentist because Megan's crown had cracked. No to a winter coat because their water heater failed again. It is strange how calmly a person can erase herself, one sensible decision at a time. I flipped the page and listed what pride will not name. The cost of smiling through Megan's stories about her family posing in wedding photos I never saw. The cost of nodding when David promised a date and then never chose one. The cost of being the refrigerator that never runs out of milk. The wallet that never quite closes. The kettle clicked off. I poured tea and set the mug near the pad. Steam fogged my lenses, then cleared. Across from me sat Harold's empty chair. The cherry wood had a dip where his right hand used to rest. He would have cleared his throat and said something plain. "Clara, you cannot build a bridge with your bones." My phone buzzed with a savings alert. I turned it face down. I circled the total again. The ink bled into a dark halo. On a fresh line, I wrote the entry I had avoided. Respect. $0 received. I looked toward the window and saw the country house in my mind. The porch I painted after Harold died. The screen door that squeaks. The way October light warms the floorboards. Property taxes arrive each year like migrating geese. In my ledger, the house had stood for a promise, a place for birthdays, pies, and someday grandchildren racing barefoot. The promise dimmed as the number held steady. I closed my eyes and set my palm over the total. A different recollection arrived. David at 8, grass-stained and breathless, throwing his arms around my waist after Little League, declaring I was the best mom in the world. I tucked that memory beside the sum, not to balance it, but to honor what had been real. Love existed. It had simply lost its seat when money took the headchair. I capped the pen and slid the pad into the drawer. The wood was warm from the mug. For the first time in years, the math felt like mercy. It did not punish me. It told the truth. The truth stung and steadied in the same breath. It gave my back a spine. I rinsed my cup and let the yellow pad rest where it was. Tomorrow I would carry those numbers to the bank and lay them down like a witness. Then I would stop paying the price of being invisible. The call came on a gray afternoon while I was folding laundry. The phone buzzed across the kitchen table, Megan's name glowing on the screen. I thought of letting it go to voicemail. My stomach already knew what was coming. Against my better judgment, I swiped to answer. Her voice jumped out sharp, clipped, almost trembling. "Clara, the country house taxes are due. $2,300. We're late already. Did you forget to make the transfer?" I stood still, holding a dish towel in my hands. Forget. As if paying their bills had ever been my responsibility. For 3 years, I had carried those taxes like a shadow, adjusting my pension, moving funds, telling myself it was temporary. Yet here she was, acting as if I had failed in a duty. My lips curved in a thin smile that surprised even me. The words rose without effort, calm and steady. "Didn't I warn you? I only help special people." The silence on the other end was louder than shouting. I could almost hear her breathing stop, then catch. A creak, a faint rustle, then nothing. For once, it wasn't me trembling. It was her. I waited 3 beats, then pressed the red button. The line went dead. I set the phone face down and felt the weight shift inside me. Something cracked open, not in pain, but in release. The house was quiet except for the tick of the wall clock. I walked to the living room cabinet and pulled out the photo album. The cover was worn, edges bent from years of fingers turning pages. Inside, Harold's face looked back at me. Our wedding day, decades ago. My hair piled high. His suit a little too tight at the shoulders. He had called me his special girl in front of everyone, I had blushed so hard I thought I might faint. I traced his smile with my fingertip. "I used to be special to you," I whispered. "Once upon a time." The next page held a picture of David as a boy, clutching a baseball glove, grinning wide with missing teeth. In the background, I could see the picnic blanket I had spread, the lemonade I had packed after a double shift. Those were the days when love was loud and obvious, when small arms wrapped tight around my waist and a single sentence, "You're the best, Mom," carried more weight than any check I ever wrote. But love had grown expensive. Somewhere along the line, it had acquired invoices, due dates, late fees. My role had shifted from mother to financier, from family to service provider. And when I asked for nothing but a chair at my son's wedding, I was told I was not special enough. I closed the album slowly, the leather cover sighing under my hand. My reflection in the glass of the cabinet door startled me. Same tired eyes, same silver streaks in my hair. Yet there was a new hardness there, something sharper. I sat at the edge of the sofa, the very sofa I had purchased for David and Megan when they said theirs was too small. I let my hands rest in my lap, palms open. I remembered every time I had skipped a meal to make sure they ate, every time I had said no to a vacation so their lights would stay on, every time I had swallowed pride so they would not feel shame. The ledger of love I had written the night before whispered at the back of my mind, $31,400. And the total did not even include the cost of standing in a kitchen with a phone pressed to my ear, listening to a woman who had married my son ask for money without a trace of respect. I rose and walked back to the table, picked up the phone again. The screen was black, my reflection staring back. For years, I had jumped when it rang, heart racing, ready to rescue. Now I felt no urgency. The next time it lit up, I promised myself I would choose whether to answer. Through the window, I saw the bare branches sway in the winter wind. Harold's voice came to me the way it sometimes did when I was alone. "Clara, you can't keep buying your place in their lives." I pressed my palm against the glass as if I could steady myself on his memory. Special people. The phrase echoed again, but softer this time, stripped of its sting. If they could use it to exclude me, I could use it to set myself free. I slid the album back onto the shelf, smoothed the towel across the table, and let the house settle into silence. This was not sadness anymore. It was something else, something firmer, resolve. From now on, when the phone rang, the answer would not be automatic. It would be mine. I woke the next morning with the same sentence echoing in my head. "I only help special people." It sounded foreign, almost cruel, but it had come out of my own mouth, and now it played like a record stuck in a groove. I sat at the table, poured myself coffee, and looked at the yellow pad still lying in the drawer. $31,400. A number that would not shrink no matter how many times I blinked. By mid-morning, I put on my winter coat and carried my purse to the car. The sky was brittle blue, the air sharp. I drove to the bank where I had walked in every month for 3 years, always in a hurry to move money into David and Megan's account before the landlord called. This time, I walked slowly. Each step toward those glass doors felt heavy and deliberate, like I was dragging chains behind me. Inside, the familiar scent of polished wood and toner drifted through the lobby. I nodded at the teller, then headed straight for the office of Mr. Henderson, the branch manager. He was a tall man in his 60s, with a voice as calm as a hymn. He had handled my transfers so many times, I was embarrassed to think of how predictable I must have seemed. He looked up from his desk as I knocked. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, standing politely. "Another transfer today." I shook my head. My throat tightened, but I forced the words out steady. "No, I've come to cancel them. Every last one." His eyebrows rose. He gestured for me to sit. "Are you sure? For 3 years, these payments have gone out like clockwork." I folded my hands in my lap. The gold of my wedding ring caught the light, dulled with age but still there. "I'm surer than I've ever been about anything." He leaned back a neck, studying me. "May I ask what changed?" I looked past him at the diplomas on the wall. "I finally opened my eyes, that's all." He nodded slowly, then began typing. The clack of his keyboard was like the ticking of a clock. With each keystroke, I felt something loosening inside me, a rope uncoiling after years of being pulled too tight. He printed a stack of papers, slid them across the desk, and handed me a pen. As I signed my name, Clara Whitmore, the pen moved smoother than it had in years. Each loop of ink felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. When it was done, he gathered the papers neatly. "There," he said. "All automatic payments canceled. No more transfers to your son's landlord or his accounts." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "Thank you, Mr. Henderson." He gave me a look I couldn't quite name, something between relief and respect. "If you need advice about protecting your accounts, come see me anytime. You deserve peace of mind." I stood, gripped the strap of my purse, and walked to the door. For years, I had walked out of that building feeling lighter because I had done my duty for David. This time, I felt lighter because I had chosen myself. As I pushed open the heavy glass doors, the winter sun spilled onto my face. For one trembling second, I thought, so this is what freedom feels like. Crossing that threshold was like stepping into another life. The automatic doors slid shut behind me with a sigh, sealing the past. On the drive home, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror as if the old Clara might still be following, the one who rushed bills through, who picked up every late-night call, who bent until she nearly broke. But the road behind me was empty. When I reached my house, I pulled into the driveway and sat for a moment, watching the front door. That door had been opened by too many hands that weren't mine. David's, Megan's, their friends, their deliveries. They had come and gone as if it were their space too, because I had given them keys in good faith. That faith had been crushed the night they told me I wasn't special enough. I stepped out, climbed the porch stairs, and unlocked the old brass knob one last time. The sound it made, grinding, loose, suddenly felt intolerable. I closed the door behind me, leaned my back against it, and whispered, "Not anymore." That afternoon, I drove to the hardware store. The aisles smelled of oil and cedar. A young clerk named Ethan showed me a selection of locks. I picked one with solid weight, brushed steel, and a key that looked sharp enough to cut glass. At home, I spread out the tools on the kitchen table. My hands shook at first, but I steadied them. I unscrewed the old plate, pried out the tired cylinder, and slid the new one into place. As I tightened the final screw, I felt like I was stitching up a wound. Then came the moment. I held the new key between my fingers, walked to the door, and slid it into the lock. The metal turned smoothly, a decisive click. Cash. The sound rang out through the quiet house like a bell announcing the hour. I stood there with my hand still on the knob, heart steady, breathing deep. That single sound carried the weight of years. It was not just a lock changing. It was a boundary restored, a dignity reclaimed. For the first time in decades, the door to my own home belonged only to me. The day began like any other. I had swept the kitchen floor, made myself tea, and settled into the quiet of the house. The new lock glinted on the front door, still stiff from being turned only a handful of times. I thought it meant safety. I thought it meant no one could enter without my say-so. But I had been careless. I had forgotten about the spare key tucked away in a drawer that David must have taken long before. When I came in from hanging laundry, I froze in the doorway. My living room was occupied. David sat on my sofa with his head lowered, Megan perched beside him in her usual posture of false poise, and a young man in a sharp gray suit occupied my armchair as if it belonged to him. On my dining table lay a neat stack of papers, a pen placed deliberately on top. "Mom," David began, his tone a practice mix of concern and control. "We were worried. We thought it would be best if you had some help managing things. This is Mr. Carter, an attorney who specializes in family affairs." The stranger stood and extended his hand as though we were at a polite business meeting. "Mrs. Whitmore, it's a pleasure. Your children have asked me to prepare a simple power of attorney. It's temporary, just until you feel less stressed. They want to help you." My eyes shifted to the paper. The words, "Power of Attorney," glared back at me in bold letters. My signature line waited, blank and hungry. Megan leaned forward, her voice syrupy. "Clara, it would make everything easier. No more worry about bills or paperwork. David and I can handle it. You can just relax and enjoy your life." I felt my knees wobble, but I held the frame of the doorway. My own house. And yet I was treated like a guest who needed convincing. My gaze moved from David's hands, clasped tight, nervous, to Megan's steady stare, to the lawyer's expectant smile. For years, I had been the one who smoothed over fear with money. For years, I had been the one who signed without question. Not today. I walked to the table without a word. My hand hovered over the papers. Instead of picking up the pen, I gathered the stack into my arms. The rustle of paper was louder than any shout. I held it tight against my chest. "If you want this," I said slowly, "you'll have to let the court decide. Not you. Not some young man I have never met. And certainly not today." Megan's face flushed crimson. "Clara, don't be dramatic. We're trying to protect you. You've been making unusual choices. Canceling payments, changing locks, isolating yourself." David shifted in his seat, his voice cracking. "Mom, we can't keep living like this. We have obligations. Rent, the car, bills. If you don't let us help, everything will collapse." I felt the papers crinkle under my grip. My answer came out calm, each word balanced like a stone in my hand. "Then let it collapse. It is not mine to carry anymore." Silence filled the room, heavy and electric. Mr. Carter cleared his throat, clearly unprepared for a refusal. "Mrs. Whitmore, perhaps you don't understand. A power of attorney is a simple measure. It guarantees your well-being." I turned to him, eyes steady. Young man, my well-being has been drained one transfer at a time for 3 years. What you're asking is not help. It's surrender, and I have surrendered enough. David stood abruptly, anger flashing across his face. Mom, why are you being so stubborn? We are your family. This isn't just about money. It's about trust. The word cut deep, but I let it pass. Trust, I repeated softly. Then why did you marry without me there? Why did you call only when you needed cash? Trust is not built on invoices. Megan reached out as if to touch my hand, her voice thin. Clara, please. You're forcing us into a corner. We just want to make sure everything is safe for the future. I stepped back, clutching the papers tighter. Safe for whom? For me or for you? No one answered. Their silence told the truth. I opened the drawer of my cabinet, placed the papers inside, and shut it with a firm click. Then I faced them, shoulders squared. This is still my house. You will leave now. If you believe I am incapable, you may bring your case to a judge. Until then, this conversation is over. The power reversed with such force that the air itself seemed to shift. Megan's lips parted in disbelief. David's jaw tightened, and the lawyer blinked as if someone had struck him. None of them had expected refusal, least of all from me. They gathered their coats in silence, the scrape of chair legs loud in the quiet. At the door, David turned once more, his voice bitter. You'll regret this, Mom. I met his eyes, calm and clear. Perhaps, but at least the regret will be mine. The new lock turned behind them with a sound sharp and certain. I leaned against the door, the echo of their footsteps fading down the walk. For the first time in years, it was not my voice shaking, not my heart racing. It was theirs. The house felt newly quiet after they left. The click of the lock still rang in my ears like a small bell. I carried the papers to the cabinet and slid the drawer shut. When I turned, a woman stood on the porch in a gray wool coat. Careful posture, a paper plate covered in foil. I opened the door. She smiled in the way people do when they introduce themselves and ask forgiveness at the same time. She lifted the plate like an offering and waited for me to speak. I am Eleanor Brooks, she said. I live 2 doors down. I heard voices earlier and then saw the cars. I baked a cinnamon coffee cake. Would you like a slice? Or at least someone to sit with for a minute? She was 65. Silver bob, clear blue eyes that missed very little. Retired school librarian, she said later, though I could have guessed from the tidy way she watched the room. We paused in the doorway, 2 women measuring distance. Her glance rested on the new lock, catching the afternoon light. Please come in, I said. In the kitchen, she set the plate on the counter and took a slow breath, as if asking permission to speak truth. Forgive me if I am overstepping, she said. But I have a daughter. Once we were close. Then she married a man who was better at wanting than working. For 2 years they called every time the rent was due. I kept saying yes until my no had rust on it. I filled the kettle and set it to heat. The burner snapped and glowed. She continued. One night they arrived with a friend who called himself an advisor. He pushed papers toward me and pointed to a line for my signature, power of attorney. He said it would be temporary to reduce my stress. I was 63 and bone-tired. I almost signed. I did not. I put the pen down. set my hand on my chest, and said, "If you think I cannot make decisions, find a judge." The kettle began to hum, and she straightened her shoulders as if the memory still asked for courage. "I cut the money after that night," she said. "All of it. I canceled transfers, sold the second car, changed my locks. I stopped apologizing. It hurt, and then it healed. 6 months later, my daughter came back without the man, carrying groceries and a small apology. She said, "Mom, I thought love meant bailouts. I was wrong. I tell you this because it is true. I cut the money, and 6 months later, my child learned what love is." She shrugged then, finished with pleading. We sat at the table and ate warm cake from napkins. Cinnamon rose like a memory, the room smelling faintly of holidays I used to cook. Eleanor folded her napkin into a square. "It does not get easy right away," she said. "The first month, you reach for the phone by habit. The second month, you taste guilt every time you make yourself a nice lunch. The third month, you sleep through the night. Keep a ledger, not only dollars, but decisions you make for your own life. It helps to see them written." I told her about David, my son, and Megan, my daughter-in-law, the wedding I was not invited to, the call about the taxes, the lawyer in my living room, the sentence I had spoken without shaking. She listened the way people do when they know silence can be a bandage. When I finished, she nodded toward the new lock. "That is not just hardware," she said. "It is a sentence that says, 'I live here.'" I felt the words settle into the floorboards like nails driven true and deep. We traded small pieces of biography. Her husband lives in a veteran's home with early Parkinson's. She visits 3 afternoons a week, brings crossword books, and sits by the window while he naps. She said, "Compassion without boundaries empties you. Compassion with boundaries fills you and still leaves you kind." She slid a small card across the table. The senior center schedule on one side, a garden club note on the other. She said, "Wednesday mornings, we meet in the church basement. Coffee, seed swaps, and stories. There are a handful of us who have lived this song. We bring ledgers and practice not explaining ourselves. If a social worker shows up because someone filed a report, call me first. Breathe. Pour tea. Do not negotiate with the old script." I laughed. The sound surprised me, as if my ribs had remembered a tune. "You talk like a librarian and a general," I said. She smiled. "Dewey Decimal in the front, steel in the spine." At the door, she handed me a cutting in a jelly jar, a piece of pothos with 2 bright leaves. "Plants root when they are trimmed," she said. "People too." After she left, I set the jar on the windowsill where the light lingers. The house did not feel empty. It felt tended. I stood by the new lock and rested my fingers on the cool steel. For the first time in days, I did not feel alone. I felt accompanied and seen, truly seen. It was a Friday morning when the doorbell rang. I had just poured coffee and set out the small cutting Eleanor had given me. The new lock clicked as I turned it, and there stood a woman in a dark coat, folder in hand, badge clipped to her lapel. "Mrs. Whitmore?" she asked, voice brisk but polite. "I'm Miss Schmidt from the County Office of Senior Services. We've received a report concerning your mental state. I'm here to conduct a wellness check." My stomach dropped, but my voice stayed even. "Who filed the report?" "I can't disclose that," she said. But the concern was that you've made sudden financial changes, cut off communication with family, and shown signs of paranoia, such as installing unnecessary security measures. Every word was scripted. I could hear Megan's phrasing in it. Unnecessary security measures. That was her language. I opened the door wider. You may come in, but I'm calling my attorney before we discuss anything. She hesitated. Mrs. Whitmore, if you've nothing to hide. I cut her off. I have nothing to hide. That's why I'll make the call. I dialed Reynolds Weber, the elder law attorney Eleanor had recommended. His voice came calm and sure, as though he had been waiting for this moment. Stay where you are, he said. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Ms. Schmidt and I sat in silence at the dining table. She flipped through her forms, eyes skimming, pen ready. I folded my hands around my mug and let the steam rise. I thought of Harold, who had always said never to argue when silence can do the work. When Weber arrived, his presence filled the room with authority. Tall, gray-haired, wire-rimmed glasses that caught the light. He shook Ms. Schmidt's hand politely, but wasted no time. Before you begin, I need to know if you have a court order. No, she admitted. This is a routine wellness check. Then this is voluntary, and my client will answer only with counsel present. Ms. Schmidt cleared her throat. The family reported concerns about financial mismanagement. Automatic payments were canceled. They say she refuses their help. Weber pulled a binder from his briefcase, thick with documents. Here are 3 years of bank records. $31,400 transferred to her son and daughter-in-law. Rent, groceries, repairs, holidays, all documented. Would you consider that mismanagement or extraordinary generosity? Ms. Schmidt flipped through the pages. Her pen hovered, then dropped. He slid over another folder. Here are her recent medical records. Physical exam clear, no medication mismanagement. And here, he placed a crisp report on top. A cognitive assessment conducted last week. Results well above average for her age. She solved every test without error. I watched Ms. Schmidt's shoulders shift as she read. The doubt that had framed her face began to soften. She looked up at me, eyes clearer. Mrs. Whitmore, do you handle your own finances? Yes. I manage my accounts, pay my taxes, and keep my house in order. The only thing I no longer do is subsidize adults who treat me as a bank account. Her cheeks flushed. And you live here alone, independently? You're sitting in a clean house, with hot coffee on the table. I cook for myself, drive my own car, and keep friendships with neighbors. I am not isolated. I am simply no longer manipulated. Weber folded his hands. Ms. Schmidt, what you're witnessing is not incapacity, it's boundaries. My client has endured years of financial exploitation. She has every right to end it. The law calls it elder financial abuse. The abusers are the ones who should be investigated, not her. The social worker's pen tapped against her form. She closed the folder at last and looked directly at me. Her tone was softer now. Mrs. Whitmore, I see no indication that you need guardianship or intervention. I will close this case. I leaned forward, my voice steady but firm. I don't need management. I need respect. Silence settled, the kind that fills a room with truth. Miss Schmidt nodded once, gathered her papers, and rose. As she left, she paused at the door. You'd be surprised how often this happens. but you are handling it well." After she was gone, I turned to Weber. My hands trembled around the empty mug, not from fear, but from the weight of victory. "You did well," he said. "You stayed calm. That matters." I walked him to the door. The new lock clicked shut behind him with that same firm sound, a reminder that this was my house, my life. I leaned against it, breathing deep. For the first time in years, I felt not only safe, but seen. That night, the house was heavy with silence. The air outside had turned sharp with winter, and the branches tapped against the window as if trying to remind me of something. I left the television off, left the radio off, and sat alone with the hum of the refrigerator and the steady tick of the clock above the mantel. The lock on the door gleamed faintly under the hallway light, a sentry I had chosen for myself. I pulled the old wedding album down from the shelf where it had sat untouched for years. The leather cover had softened, edges curled. The gold lettering almost faded away. My hands shook as I set it on the table, as though I were handling something alive. I lit the small lamp in the corner, the one Harold and I had bought at a yard sale in '74. The light spilled across the room in a warm golden haze, softening the wrinkles on my hands and turning the edges of the photographs into fragile gold. I opened the first page. There we were, Harold in his too-tight suit, me in a simple dress with a veil we had borrowed from my cousin. The smile on my face was wide and certain. The smile on his was quieter but steady, the kind that made me feel safe in every storm. I ran my fingers over the glossy paper. "Harold," I whispered, my throat thick. "I've been such a fool for so long. I mistook sacrifice for love, and love for silence. I thought giving everything meant I would be kept close. Instead, it only taught them that I could be drained." My words broke and scattered like glass. A single tear slipped down and darkened the corner of the photo. I didn't wipe it away. The album could hold it. It was my truth. The room seemed to listen. The clock's tick slowed in my ears. Even the refrigerator's hum dimmed until all I could hear was my own breath and the faint sound of the wind outside. I leaned closer to Harold's face on the page. "I gave David too much," I said, voice soft but steady. "I gave until the number 31,400 sat like a stone in my chest. And when they married without me, I told myself maybe I still mattered in some hidden way. But tonight I know better. I wasn't special to them, not like I was to you." I turned the page. Our first house. Its paint flaking even then. Harold holding David as a baby. Both of them looking at me like I was the center of the world. For years, I believed that moment had set the shape of my life forever. Now I saw how quickly it had slipped away. "Maybe I kept trying to buy back that look," I murmured. The arms reaching, the small voice saying I was the best. I tried to purchase what was never for sale, and in the process, Harold, I lost myself. The light from the lamp softened further, pooling over the table, catching the faint glint of my wedding band. I held it up, turning it in the glow. The metal was scratched, dulled from decades of dishwater and work, but it was mine, still encircling me, still a promise that at least once in this life, I was chosen without condition. I pressed the album shut gently and rested both hands on the cover. The tears came then, slow, quiet, not wrenching sobs, but a stream that slipped free without resistance. They soaked into the fabric of my blouse, dampened my cheeks, and fell onto the wood grain of the table. Each drop seemed to carve something out, making space for breath again. I can't get those years back, I whispered to Harold's absent presence. But I can hold the years that remain. I can claim them for myself. I will not be milked until dry. I will not let love be tallied like bills. I am tired of being invisible in my own home. From now on, I see myself. The words settled in the room like vows. The clock resumed its tick, the refrigerator its hum, but they no longer sounded heavy. They sounded like life, ordinary and honest. I leaned back, wiped my face with both palms, and blew out a long breath. On the sill, Eleanor's pothos cutting caught the lamplight, its leaves bright and tender, roots beginning to curl in the jar of water. A small reminder, trimming can mean growth. I stood, closed the album, and slid it back into its place on the shelf. My fingers lingered on the spine. "Thank you, Harold," I said softly. "You taught me what special felt like. Now I will teach myself." The lock clicked once more when I checked it before bed. Catch. That sound now felt like Harold's hand steadying mine, like a benediction whispered through steel and silence. I climbed into bed lighter than I had been in years. The first time I realized Mr. Davis was talking about me, I was leaving the grocery store with a bag of oranges and milk. A woman I only vaguely knew from the senior center leaned close as we crossed paths. Her tone was hushed, pitying. "Clara, I heard you've been having trouble, forgetting things, locking yourself in. They say you've become a little strange." I stood still in the parking lot, my bag heavy against my hip. Trouble, strange, forgetting. None of it had come from her. The words carried Davis's fingerprints. He was the neighbor across the street with a yard trimmed sharp as a ruler and a mouth that trimmed even sharper. He didn't like cars parking near his curb, didn't like children laughing past his porch. He certainly didn't like me since the day he saw Eleanor visit and assumed I was stirring gossip. I drove home slow, hands tight on the wheel, and when I stepped out, Davis was already on his porch, arms crossed. His smirk was small, but it reached. "Evening, Clara. Heard the county came to check on you. Must have been quite a scare. Folks are saying you're not quite yourself these days." I felt heat rise in my chest, but I kept my voice low. "I am myself, Mr. Davis. More than I've been in years." He shrugged, turned back to his immaculate roses. "That's not what people see." I walked inside, shut the door, and leaned against it. The air inside felt thick. For a moment, shame pressed down like an old coat I thought I had shed. To be dismissed by David and Megan was one thing. To be painted mad by a neighbor was another. Community could carry rumors like wildfire, and in a small town, reputation was currency. I sat at the table and stared at the ledger I had started. Rent transfers, grocery receipts, medical bills, proof on paper that my life had been drained for theirs. But the page didn't quiet the ache in my chest. What if people believed him? What if every sideways glance in the market was no longer imagined? Then came the whisper inside me, steadier than fear. "You don't need them to understand. You need to understand yourself." The words settled like stones across a rushing river, giving me footing. I breathed deep. I thought of Eleanor, who had survived her daughter's manipulation. I thought of Harold, who once told me, "Truth doesn't need an audience, Clara. It just needs you to hold it." And so I decided to speak, not to Davis, not to the neighbors, but to myself, and through myself to the silence around me. I pulled the small tin from the top cabinet where I kept my vitamins. Inside was an old pill bottle, half empty, rattling faintly. The label had long faded, but I knew it by heart. My prescription for blood pressure, the one my doctor had urged me to keep steady. For months, I had stretched it, having pills, skipping days. Why? Because David needed another 600. Because Megan wanted money for car insurance. Because I told myself their roof was more important than my heart. I set the bottle on the table and stared at it. My hands shook, not from illness, but from memory. This was the truth no one knew. The truth I had hidden under kindness, under excuses. I had endangered my own body so they could live comfortably. The tears came sharp, not soft. "I stopped taking my medicine," I whispered to the empty room. "I thought it was love. I thought that was what mothers did. I chose their rent over my heartbeat." I pressed my palms flat on the table. No more. The silence of the house absorbed my confession like a witness. It was not weakness. It was clarity. This was the unspoken truth I had carried like a stone in my chest. Speaking it made me lighter, though it cut deep. The next morning, I took the bottle to the pharmacy and refilled it properly. When the pharmacist asked if I wanted a 3-month supply, I said yes, steady as a bell. He smiled, unaware he was watching me reclaim something larger than medication. Back home, Davis was again on his porch, trimming his roses. He called across the street. "Everything all right, Clara?" His tone carried that knowing smirk. I looked at him and felt no urge to answer. Instead, I raised the small paper bag with my medicine inside. Not for him to understand, but for me to remember. I stepped into my house, shut the door, and turned the lock. The catch rang louder than any rumor he could spread. That night, as I set the bottle by my bedside, I whispered to Harold's picture on the dresser, "I almost gave them my life. Not just my money, but my breath, my pulse. Never again." And for the first time in years, I swallowed my pill with water and gratitude. Not for them, for me. The envelope arrived on a damp Tuesday morning. Heavy paper, official seal, the kind of letter that makes your stomach drop before you even open it. I stood at the kitchen counter with a knife, slid it clean, and unfolded the document. My name at the top, bold as judgment. Beneath it, the words, "Petition for Guardianship," filed by David Whitmore and Megan Whitmore. My knees weakened. I had to grip the counter to stay upright. My own son, flesh of my flesh, had gone to court to declare me incapable of handling my life. The boy I had rocked through fever, the young man I had worked overtime to send to college, the husband I had prayed would be gentle with his wife. He had signed his name to papers asking the state to strip me of my independence. I read the language 3 times. Signs of erratic behavior, sudden financial decisions, paranoia regarding security. The phrases were polished, legal, but I could hear Megan's cadence in every line. They were painting me as a confused old woman who needed their control. I pressed the paper flat against the counter, my breath catching. This wasn't just betrayal, it was burial. They were trying to bury me alive in the label of incompetence. My mind raced. Guardianship would mean losing everything. My money, my choices, my dignity. They could sell my house, empty my accounts, dictate what medicine I took, who I spoke to, even where I lived. To them, I would be a signature, a problem solved. I walked to the living room and sat with the paper trembling in my lap. The clock ticked on, merciless. My chest ached as if the walls were closing in. David, I whispered to the silence. How did we get here? I thought of him at 12, standing in the doorway with his science fair ribbon, grinning as he said, Mom, I couldn't have done it without you. I thought of him at 20, eyes bright with plans, thanking me for a loan to start fresh after college. Somewhere along the way, the gratitude had soured into entitlement, and now entitlement had calcified into aggression. The question clawed inside me. If you were in my place, would you fight your own child? Would you stand in court and let the world hear him call you unfit? Would you dare to cut him off completely? The room held its breath with me. My answer came slow but steady. Love without truth is not love. A mother who allows herself to be destroyed teaches her child nothing but cruelty. If I surrendered now, I would be teaching David that greed conquers all, that betrayal has no cost. I folded the papers back into the envelope and set them on the mantel. My hands were shaking, but my spine was straight. Harold's picture sat above the fireplace, watching with quiet eyes. You told me once, I whispered, that raising a child means teaching him right from wrong, even when it breaks your own heart. So this is what it means, Harold. This is what it costs. The clock ticked louder, like a gavel. If you're listening now, I wonder, would you have the strength to fight your own blood, to look into the eyes of the child you bore and say, no more? It is the heaviest burden I have ever carried. But perhaps it is also the only way left to love him, not by feeding his weakness, but by refusing to bow to it. I sat there until the sun dipped behind the trees, the envelope glowing in the last of the light, a summons not just from the court, but from my own conscience. My war was no longer private. It was written in ink and filed in records. And so I chose. I would walk into that courtroom, not with bitterness, but with clarity. I would not prove myself to them. I would prove myself to me. Reynolds Weber came by the next morning, his briefcase heavier than usual, his face drawn but determined. He laid the guardianship papers on my table and tapped them with one long finger. Clara, they will try to make this about your mind. That's their only chance. We are going to cut that line before it can tighten around you. I want you to see a psychologist I trust, Dr. Evelyn Moore. She specializes in elder cognition. If she certifies you competent, the court will have no grounds. The thought of submitting to a test made my stomach twist. For months, I had lived under the shadow of their accusations, each rumor sharpened to sound like truth. Still, I nodded. If this is what it takes, I'll do it. The following Tuesday, I walked into Dr. Moore's office. The waiting room smelled faintly of lavender, and the receptionist spoke softly, as though to calm nerves before storms. When my name was called, Dr. Moore herself came to the door. A woman in her 50s, short dark hair streaked with silver, eyes quick but kind. She led me into a sunlit room with bookshelves lined in neat rows. No harsh lights, no sterile instruments. Just 2 chairs, a desk, and a small tray with sharpened pencils. She gestured for me to sit. Mrs. Whitmore, this isn't an interrogation. Think of it as a checkup for the mind. We'll go through memory, reasoning, numbers, language. You take your time. I folded my hands in my lap. My son believes I'm unfit to live my own life. I need you to tell the truth, whatever it is. She smiled gently. That's exactly what we'll do. She began with orientation questions. What day is it? Tuesday, January 16th. I answered without pause. Where are we right now? In your office on Maple Avenue, 2 blocks from the courthouse. She nodded, jotting notes. Then came memory exercises. She read a list of 10 words: apple, penny, church, window, river, dog, lamp, jacket, key, garden, and asked me to repeat them. I did. 5 minutes later, after we had moved on, she asked again. I recited all 10. Impressive, she said. Then came arithmetic. If you have $20 and spend $3.50 on groceries, how much remains? $16.50. And if you divide that among 5 people, $3.30 each. She raised an eyebrow. Most people need paper for that one. I shrugged. I've stretched budgets tighter than that for years. We moved into problem solving. She showed me a drawing of geometric shapes. Which one doesn't belong? The triangle, I said. It has 3 sides. The rest are quadrilaterals. She gave me a series of proverbs. What does a stitch in time saves 9 mean? That if you address a problem early, it prevents bigger trouble later. When she asked me to count backward from 100 by 7s, I did so steady, my voice flat but clear. 93, 86, 79, 72. She finally set her pen down and looked at me over the rims of her glasses. Mrs. Whitmore, I've tested hundreds of people in your age group. Many struggle with half of what you just did. To be frank, you are sharper than plenty of 40-year-olds I've seen. I leaned back, a dry laugh breaking loose. So I'm mentally fit, yet none of this buys me love, does it? None of these answers would have earned me a seat at my son's wedding table. Her expression softened. Cognition and affection aren't the same currency, but clarity will protect you when love fails, and clarity you have. I felt a lump rise in my throat, but I swallowed it down. Then write it down. Put it on paper so the court can see I am not the senile woman they paint me to be. I will, she said firmly, and I will testify if needed. When I left her office, the winter sun was low, gilding the sidewalks. I clutched the folder she had given me, the report that declared me capable. It should have felt like triumph. Instead, it felt like a mirror held to a wound. Walking to my car, I whispered to Harold, as though he walked beside me. I passed every test, love. Numbers, words, logic, all intact. But the one test I wanted to pass, I failed long ago, the test of keeping our son's heart. The wind bit cold against my cheeks. I laughed once more, short and hollow. Turns out, Harold, clarity can save my house, but not my family. Weber called the day after my evaluation. His voice carried a new edge. Clara, the petition includes a witness statement from your pharmacist. It suggests irregular medication use and hoarding. The name is Mr. Green. Do you know him? I do, I said. He has filled my prescriptions for years. Then we will talk to him, Weber said. Today. The pharmacy smelled of isopropyl and wintergreen. Mr. Green stood at the consultation window, white coat crisp, sleeves marked with tiny pen lines. He brightened on seeing me, then faltered when he noticed Weber and the folder under his arm. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said. "How are you?" "I've been better," I answered. "Mr. Green, did you sign a statement about my medications?" Color rose in his cheeks. He glanced toward the back counter. "A young woman came in a few weeks ago, your daughter-in-law. She said she was worried and asked whether you were consistent with refills. I told her you mostly purchase vitamins and one blood pressure prescription. She produced a pre-filled form asking me to confirm irregular purchasing patterns. I thought it was insurance paperwork. I signed without reading closely. I'm sorry." Weber set the binder on the counter. "That document supports a guardianship petition. It portrays Mrs. Whitmore as incapable. She is not. Here are her medical records and a cognitive report from Dr. Moore." Mr. Green's shoulders sagged. "I never intended harm. I should have asked more questions." I kept my voice even. "Please put the truth on paper, not to punish you, to make it right." He motioned us to the consultation room. We sat at a small table, laminate scratched by years of pill bottles. He opened his laptop. "Tell me exactly what happened from your perspective," he said. "I canceled payments I had been making for my son," I replied. "They called that decline. A social worker reviewed records and closed the case. Now they claim I mismanage medicine. You know what I take." He nodded. "One antihypertensive, no controlled substances, multivitamins, calcium. Refill steady when due, no early fills, no gaps I'd consider concerning." Weber leaned forward. "Please write a statement on company letterhead. Include the date Megan visited, her request, the pre-filled language, and your understanding at the time. Clarify your professional observations of Mrs. Whitmore's adherence." Mr. Green typed. The click of keys felt like rain after a long dry season. He printed, read, then looked at me. "She also suggested you were paranoid for installing a new lock. That struck me as odd." "Include it," Weber said. Mr. Green signed and added his license number. He slid the paper across as if returning something he had borrowed from my life. "I am sorry, Mrs. Whitmore. I should have protected you from assumptions. If you need me in court, I will testify. I will bring my dispensing logs and clarify what I observed." I folded the sheet and placed it in Weber's folder. "Everyone gets fooled sometimes," I said. "I just woke up at 72. He let out a breath, relief and shame mixing. "Thank you for not shouting," he murmured. "I've shouted enough in my own head," I said. "It never changed anything." Weber rose and shook his hand. "We appreciate your correction. We will file this with the court and attach Dr. Moore's report. If opposing counsel contacts you, refer them to me." As we walked out, Mr. Green called. "Mrs. Whitmore, you look steady today." "I feel steady," I answered. Outside, the sky was bright winter blue. The plastic bag rustled in my purse. My refill rested like a small promise. I had once halved pills to fund other people's lives. Today, I would take the full dose because this life was mine, and wholly mine now. Weber and I stood by his car reviewing next steps. He tapped the folder. "This removes one pillar of their case. Expect an affidavit from a neighbor. They often enlist busybodies." "Mr. Davis," I said, and Weber's mouth tightened. "We will handle him in court," he said. "Truth has a way of standing while noise exhausts itself." On the drive home, I passed Davis on his porch. He pretended to prune a rose that did not need pruning and watched me with the flat interest of a crow. I kept my eyes on the road. Silence, I reminded myself, is armor. Let him talk. I would keep building my case, brick by brick, until the noise had nowhere to land. At my kitchen table, I read Mr. Green's statement again. The language was clean. Dates, facts, professional opinion. Paper can be a shield. It can also be a mirror. In it, I saw two versions of myself. The woman who bent until she disappeared, and the woman who had learned to stand. I slid the document behind Dr. Moore's report. The binder looked heavier, but I felt lighter. When I set it on the counter, the sound it made was small and satisfying, like a door clicking shut. Eleanor knocked as the afternoon thinned. She held up 2 mugs and a thermos. "Truce tea," she said. I poured for both of us and told her what happened. She nodded at the folder. "Quiet victories," she said. "They add up." "They do," I said. I lifted my cup. "To waking up." "To waking up," she echoed, and we drank to it like a vow. The morning of the hearing, I dressed in my black wool suit. The one Harold had once said made me look like I could run a boardroom. My hands trembled as I pinned my silver brooch to the lapel, but my spine held straight. When I walked into the courthouse, I felt every step echo like I was crossing a threshold no one should ever have to face. A mother defending her sanity against her own child. The courtroom smelled of wood polish and old paper. Judge Miller presided from the bench, his expression calm but sharp, as if he had seen every shade of family fracture. On the opposite side, David sat stiff in a gray suit that looked newly bought. Megan beside him in black, clutching tissues as if grief were her prop. Their lawyer, a man named Mr. Carter, stacked papers in neat piles, his voice oily when he rose to speak. "Your Honor," Carter began, "this is not about malice but about concern. My clients love Mrs. Whitmore deeply. They have watched her change. Sudden decisions, paranoia, financial recklessness. They fear she is no longer able to manage her affairs." Megan sniffled, her eyes glistening as she dabbed the corner of her mouth. "She has always been like a second mother to me," she said when called to the stand. "But lately, she's different. She shut us out. She won't answer our calls. She spends money strangely, locks herself away. It breaks our hearts." Weber leaned close to me, whispered, "Wait, let her overplay." He stood for cross-examination. "Mrs. Whitmore, when was the last time you phoned Clara just to ask how she was, without requesting money?" Megan faltered, eyes darting toward Carter. We talk about many things." "A date, please." "I don't remember." "Is it true that you told her she was not invited to your wedding because only special people were welcome?" Her face flushed. "Those words were taken out of context." Weber's voice was steady. "What context makes it acceptable to exclude your husband's mother from her only son's wedding?" The silence that followed was sharper than any gavel. Then David was called. He swore to tell the truth, his jaw tight. "My mom has always been generous," he began. "But lately she's erratic, canceling support suddenly, cutting us off. We think she's being manipulated." Weber rose again. "Mr. Whitmore, how much money have you and your wife received from your mother in the last 3 years?" "I don't know the exact amount," David muttered. "Does $31,400 sound accurate?" Weber asked, holding up the ledger I had kept. David's silence was deafening. And in that time, how often did you visit your mother without requesting money or help of some kind? David shifted in his seat, eyes falling to the table. He said nothing. Answer the question, Judge Miller pressed. Not often, David admitted. Weber nodded, then gestured toward me. Your Honor, Mrs. Whitmore wishes to make a statement. I stood slowly, my knees steady beneath me. The courtroom blurred for a moment, but my voice was clear. For 3 years, I paid their rent, $600 a month. I covered medications, car repairs, groceries, gifts. I kept a ledger. It comes to $31,400. That was money from my savings, from my husband's inheritance, from years of work. I gave it all because I believed love could be bought in installments. My throat tightened, but I pressed on. Then came the wedding. When I asked about the date, my daughter-in-law laughed and said, "We got married last night, for special people only." I, who had spent my life raising their roof and filling their fridge, was not considered special. I looked at Judge Miller, then at David, who could not meet my eyes. I once was special. My husband, Harold, made me special every day of our marriage. That was enough. I do not need to buy the title again. Not from them. The room was still. Even Carter shifted uncomfortably. Weber held up Dr. Moore's report, then Mr. Green's corrected statement. The evidence is clear, he said. Mrs. Whitmore is competent. What she has done is set boundaries. Her children may not like those boundaries, but disliking them does not make her unfit. Judge Miller leaned forward, his hands steepled. I have heard the testimony. I have reviewed the evaluations. Mrs. Whitmore is fully competent. This petition is not an act of love, but of control. It is denied in full. The gavel struck wood. The sound was final, like a door shutting on a storm. David looked up, panic flaring in his eyes. Megan grabbed his arm, whispering furiously, but I no longer strained to hear. I gathered my papers, my dignity intact. As I walked from the courtroom, Weber at my side, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not victorious in a loud way, victorious in the quiet way that matters. My truth had stood taller than their lies. The gavel struck wood, sharp as thunder, and Judge Miller's words echoed through the courtroom. The petition for guardianship is denied in its entirety. Mrs. Whitmore is competent to manage her own affairs. Case dismissed. For a moment, the world seemed suspended. My breath caught in my chest, and the air felt heavier, thicker, as if even oxygen needed time to absorb what had just been declared. I had won. The law, at least, recognized my dignity. David stared at the table, jaw tight, refusing to look at me. My boy, the one who once fell asleep against my chest after long Little League games, sat in a suit he could not afford, trying to erase me with silence. Megan, on the other hand, looked straight at me. Her eyes brimmed not with tears but with fire, her lips tight in a line of pure hatred. If looks could cut, I would have bled across that courtroom floor. I gathered my papers with steady hands. Weber placed a hand on my arm, a subtle reminder that I was not alone, but I still felt a hollow echo where a son's love was supposed to be. Walking past David, I allowed myself one last glance. He shifted uncomfortably, pretending to adjust his tie. He would not meet my eyes, and that told me everything. Shame lived in him, but not enough to undo the damage, not enough to apologize. Megan whispered something sharp into his ear, her hand clutching his sleeve like a leash. He nodded, still not looking at me. I realized then that I was no longer his compass. She was, and the needle pointed only toward money. Inside, a voice whispered the truth I had dreaded. Perhaps I lost my son today. But I kept myself. The hallway outside the courtroom smelled faintly of lemon polish. I walked it slowly, each step deliberate, the heels of my shoes tapping like a metronome of survival. Around me, other cases were being called, other families breaking under different weights, but mine was finished. The verdict had been spoken. I sat on a wooden bench by the window while Weber made a call to file the paperwork. The late afternoon light streamed through, catching the dust in the air. I thought of Harold, of the day we stood in front of a judge ourselves, saying vows that held even when death parted us. He had made me special every single day of our marriage, without demanding a ledger of what I paid. That memory was both balm and blade. A tear slid down, not for the court's decision. I was grateful for that, but for the hollow victory it represented. What good was competence without connection? What joy in freedom if it came at the price of family? I wiped my face with the edge of my sleeve and whispered, I am still here. Harold, I am still me. Megan and David walked past, their lawyer trailing behind. Megan muttered something too low to catch, but her stare lingered. It was not over for her. I could see it. She was already plotting the next angle, the next manipulation. And David, my son, followed her like a shadow. I did not stop them. I did not speak. Silence is sometimes the sharpest blade. When Weber returned, he said, You should feel proud, Clara. You stood your ground. I do, I replied. My voice was calm, but my chest ached. But pride doesn't erase grief. I think I've lost him. Weber's eyes softened. Maybe for now, or maybe forever, but you have not lost yourself, and that matters more than you know. As we walked out of the courthouse, I felt the winter wind wrap around me, brisk and clean. I lifted my face to it, letting it sting. It reminded me I was alive, still capable of feeling, still capable of choosing. I had survived the trial. I had survived their betrayal. But survival is not the same as peace. That I would have to build piece by piece from the fragments left behind. Maybe one day David would wake from the spell of entitlement. Maybe he never would. Either way, I could no longer spend my life waiting at that door. That evening, I placed the court documents in a drawer with Harold's letters. Proof that I was sane. Proof that I was free. Proof that I was enough. I whispered to the empty kitchen. I was special once. I don't need to buy that title again. The house was quiet, but inside me a bittersweet chord rang true. I had won, yet I had also lost. And in that paradox, I chose to stand tall. When I returned home after the verdict, the house looked different. Not physically. The shutters still needed paint. The roses still leaned against the porch rail. But in my eyes, it had shifted. It was no longer a fortress under siege. It was mine again, entirely mine. The first thing I did was call Mr. Jacobs, the locksmith who had worked in town for 40 years. Bring me the best locks you have, I told him. Money is not the question. Security is. He arrived that afternoon, toolbox in hand, smelling faintly of pipe tobacco. Together we walked from door to door. I stood by while he removed the old brass locks, the ones David still had keys for, the ones I should have changed long ago. The sound of screws loosening was like a release valve inside my chest. At the front door, Jacobs fitted a deadbolt so solid it could stop a battering ram. He let me turn the key first. When it clicked into place, the sound rang clear, like a bell announcing a new season. I stepped back, key still warm in my palm, and whispered to myself, "Threshold." For years, that door had opened too easily. David and Megan walking in without asking, dropping their burdens onto my lap, claiming my house like a second home. Now every hinge, every bolt belonged to me alone. Crossing it felt different, like moving from one life to the next. After Jacobs left, I brewed tea in the blue china pot I had kept since my wedding day. Harold used to say the pot made even plain tea taste like a ceremony. For years I had rushed through cups, distracted by phone calls, by bills, by other people's needs. But that evening, I carried the tray out to the porch, sat in the wicker chair, and poured carefully. The steam rose in curls, carrying the faint scent of jasmine. I lifted the cup and inhaled deeply. It was the first time in years I noticed the fragrance, really noticed it, warm, floral, soothing. I sipped slowly, letting the flavors settle on my tongue, and for the first time in a long time, the tea didn't taste like obligation or fatigue. It tasted like freedom. The street was quiet. Mr. Davis's porch light flickered across the way, but I didn't care any more about his muttering. Birds rustled in the trees as the evening light softened into gold. I wrapped my cardigan tighter around my shoulders and allowed myself to breathe without hurry. I thought of David, of Megan, of the storm they had dragged me through. My chest still ached with the loss, but I no longer felt hunted. I had crossed the line, locked it behind me, and set myself firmly on my own side. Maybe I lost a son today, I whispered into the cooling air, but I kept my soul. And maybe that is the quietest, deepest kind of victory. The tea cooled in my cup, but the warmth lingered in me. I leaned back, listened to the crickets, and let the silence be more than absence. Tonight, it was safety. Tonight, it was peace. A week after the trial, Eleanor knocked on my door with a smile as steady as spring sunlight. She carried a basket of scones and an invitation. "Clara," she said, "come with me tonight. It's our garden club meeting. Nothing fancy. Just women, coffee, and stories." For a moment, I hesitated. I had grown so used to shrinking my world down to bills and phone calls that the idea of sitting in a circle of strangers felt foreign. But something in her voice reminded me of Harold's gentle nudges whenever I tried to retreat too far into myself. I nodded. "All right, Eleanor, tonight." The meeting was held in the church basement, a room that smelled of soil and lemon cleaner. Folding chairs were arranged in a circle. At least a dozen women were there, most around my age, some older, all with hands that looked like they knew hard work. They greeted me not with questions about David or Megan, not with pity, but with warmth that expected nothing in return. We began, as Eleanor explained, not with plants, but with truth. Each woman shared something she had learned about dignity. Maria, her voice soft, told us how she stopped lending money to her brother, who always promised to repay but never did. "The day I said no," she said, "I finally slept through the night." Carmen admitted she had once signed over her pension to her daughter. "When I stopped," she said with a laugh, both sad and proud, "I gained a daughter back, not a collector." As they spoke, I felt my throat tighten. I wasn't unique. I wasn't alone. I was part of a silent army of women who had given too much, waited too long, and finally found the courage to draw a line. When it was my turn, I opened slowly. My son tried to make the court believe I couldn't think straight. All because I stopped paying his bills. For 3 years, I gave him $31,000. Rent, repairs, gifts, groceries. And still, it wasn't enough. He and his wife told me I wasn't special enough to be at their wedding. Gasps circled the room, but not of judgment, of recognition. Eleanor placed her hand over mine. "Tell them what you told me on the porch," she urged. I swallowed, then said, "I finally realized I don't need to buy love. I was special once. To my husband. That's enough." The room was quiet. Then Elfrida, the eldest of the group with silver hair like crown feathers, leaned forward. "Clara," she said, "you've crossed the hardest threshold, the one from silence into self-respect. That is family. That is love. Don't look back." Something shifted in me then. These women weren't bound to me by blood, but by scars that matched my own. They laughed when I laughed, nodded when I trembled, and in their company, I felt stitched back together. At the end, Eleanor pressed a packet of daisy seeds into my hand. "We call it our promise seed," she said. "Plant it, watch it grow. Remember you are never alone." On the walk home, I held that packet like it was gold. For the first time since Harold died, I didn't feel abandoned. I had found a chosen family, one that required no ledgers, no proof, no money, only truth. That night, I set the seed packet on my windowsill beside Harold's photo. The soft smile in his picture seemed to approve. I whispered into the stillness, "I may have lost what I thought was family, but I've found what family really is." And with that, peace settled in like a quilt over my shoulders. I wrote the letter after dinner, when the house had gone still and the kettle cooled on the stove. I cleared the table, set out a single sheet of cream paper, and uncapped Harold's fountain pen. The nib scratched soft against the first line. I kept the television dark and let the refrigerator hum and the clock tick. "Dear Harold, you always said to write when my heart felt crowded. This is me obeying you at last. I want the truth to stand even though you are not here to answer." I stood in a courtroom and did not shake. They tried to make me small. I stayed my full size. The judge saw me. Reynolds Weber defended me. And Dr. Moore said, "My mind is sound." You would have raised one eyebrow and grinned. You always trusted my head even when I doubted it. The harder lesson is this: clarity does not buy love. I could not purchase a place in our son's life. Not with dollars, not with apologies. I once believed love arrived with invoices. Now I know better. Love arrives clean, or it does not arrive at all. I have stopped trying to buy what should be given freely. If that means fewer chairs at my table, so be it. I would rather share bread with the honest than feast with the hungry selfish. You called me your special girl. I hold that like a lantern when rooms go dark. I was special in your eyes without earning it. Perhaps losing the title in theirs stung so deeply. Today, I understand something new. I do not need their certificate. My breath is certificate enough. My choices are witness. I changed the locks again and sat with jasmine tea on the porch. The cup finally had a scent. Freedom has a taste, faint and steady. I recognized it. There is a ledger on the shelf with every transfer I made for David and Megan. 31,400. It looks heavy, but it can stay where it is. I no longer carry it in my body. I have put down the habit of answering late-night rings like a firehouse bell. If the phone calls now, it will meet a woman who pauses first. I do not hate them. Hatred would tie me again. I release them the way you taught me to release a fish I could not keep. I planted the daisy seeds from Eleanor, the neighbor who arrived with coffee cake and spine. The garden club welcomed me with clean hands and unhurried listening. They are my chosen family. I am learning to laugh again without flinching. The house no longer echoes with fear. It holds a quieter music. I will not pretend I am not grieving. I grieve the boy who ran to me from the ball field, the man I hoped he would become. I grieve the grandchildren I may not meet. Yet grief does not cancel gratitude. I have sunlight in the mornings, a brain that balances accounts, a body that climbs the porch steps and rests when it needs to. Freedom is never too expensive. I can pay its price, and I am willing. If you were here, you would say, "Keep going, Clara." So I will. I will bake a pie and eat the first slice warm. I will refinish the porch rail when the weather turns. I will drive to the coast and let the wind remind me I belong to myself. I will take my medicine on time. I will keep a chair open for kindness and keep the locks firm against harm. Love. Clara. I folded the page along 2 clean seams and slipped it into the wooden box that holds our vows and your watch. I did not seal an envelope. I did not need the post. The letter was not meant to travel. It was meant to hold my face up like a mirror and say, "Here you are." Then I slid the box into the cupboard, brewed tea, and watched the steam rise steady as a promise. I had said what needed saying, and I did not need anyone's permission to keep living. I set the old album on the kitchen table and let the afternoon light find it. My hands knew every crease. The leather had molded to my palms after years of holding on. I opened to the page where Harold stands beside me, tie slightly crooked, pride straight as a flagpole. The next page holds David at 6, gap-toothed, clutching a paper crown he made for Father's Day. I trace the crown with one finger, then stop. I am not erasing the past. I am letting it rest where it belongs, on paper, not on my back. I close the album gently and hold it to my chest for a slow breath. I rise, cross the room, and return it to the shelf above the mantel. It slides into its place beside Harold's letters and the wooden box that keeps our vows. My hand lingers on the spine. "Thank you," I whisper. In the kitchen, the kettle begins to murmur. I steep jasmine in the blue wedding pot and carry the cup to the front room. The lock on the door glints under the lamp. I sit by the window where evening gathers and sip. Warmth spreads through my chest. It is quiet, but not empty. It is quiet and mine. Across the street, Mr. Davis adjusts his porch light and looks away. I do not mind. Rumors burn out when there is nothing left to feed them. I have stopped feeding them. I sip again, tasting the floral lift I used to rush past. When you stop running, even tea finds its voice. I let my shoulders drop. Quiet no longer feels like punishment. It feels like space. Outside, the sky carries a thin silver line where day gives way to night, and the maples whisper like old friends trading secrets. I feel the house breathe with me, floorboards eased, curtains still, as if the rooms themselves approve of this smaller, kinder way of living. I belong here, on my own terms. A soft knock interrupts the hush. I set the cup down and go to the door. Through the glass, I see Eleanor's silhouette and her ready smile. I turn the new key and open the door. The evening air carries cinnamon and apples. "We bake tonight," she says, lifting a covered pie tin. "Too many apples, not enough willpower. Will you help us fix the second problem?" I laugh. The sound feels easy. "You had me at apples. Come as you are," she adds. I leave the door open a hand's width while I fetch a cardigan. The gap lets in cool air and the smell of leaves. Door ajar, heart ajar. I slide into my sweater, take the pie to lighten the load, and step back. She shakes her head. "Take your time," she says. "We will be on the porch. I saved you the good corner piece." We stand there a moment in the lamplight. Then I nod. "I will be right out." I turn toward the kitchen for forks, pause, and look at the opening I have left. The door is not wide. It is open just enough for a friend, just enough for light, just enough for a future that chooses kindness. I lift my cup, take one last sip, and speak to the quiet room as if Harold still leans in the doorway. True love never has a price. And freedom, I have learned, is never too expensive. Before we say goodbye, we would love to know where you are watching from. Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee? Or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let us know in the comments. We read everyone with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel. Not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Wherever you are, we hope you carry this story with you, and remember, sometimes the miracle does not knock on your door. It waits quietly until you are ready to open your heart. Take care, and we will see you in the next story.